Who knew rabbit metaphors would be so big this year? Hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about the 2019 horror film Us. It stars Lupita Nyong'o, Winston Duke, Shahadani Wright-Joseph, and Evan Alex, and was directed by Jordan Peele in his sophomore directorial outing. Us tells the story of Adelaide Wilson, played by Lupita Nyong'o, who, along with her husband and 2 kids, takes a trip to their family's Santa Cruz vacation home. It isn't long before the family encounters a set of doppelgangers who look just like them. The doppelgangers' murderous intentions are obvious, but their motives and origin are unclear, and the Wilson family must fight in an attempt to survive the encounter and uncover the truths behind the doppelgangers. Much like Jordan Peele's previous film Get Out, Us can be viewed through 2 different lenses: the superficial plot lens and the allegorical, metaphorical social commentary lens. And much like with Get Out, each of these lenses provide us with an exciting and thought-provoking look into the story being told. The 2 different lenses can be used separately to glean different insight and enjoyment from the film, but it's when these 2 lenses overlap that we're able to see the more complete picture. For a film like this to work and have that more cerebral overlap, the individual lenses first need to function independently. You need to have a compelling and interesting story, but also an underlying reason to tell that story. In the case of Us, the film succeeds in establishing both lenses individually. As a result, you can enjoy this film on a number of different levels. First and foremost, Us functions as an exciting, intense horror movie. Horror is a very subjective genre, so the degree of scariness varies from person to person. I didn't find this to be very scary, but I was also completely okay with that, because instead of fear and terror, I was filled with a very nagging sense of uneasiness. The idea of doppelgangers is inherently creepy, but this movie really takes that idea and runs with it. The way they speak and communicate with each other, the unnatural and jerky way in which they move, their whole visual aesthetic, it's all incredibly unsettling. As soon as we're made aware of these doppelgangers, there's this element of the unknown that gets added, and it only heightens our apprehension of these already creepy things. Who or what are they? Where did they come from? What do they want with our main characters? Those are the core questions that are central to any horror movie. And although I would consider this movie to be more of a creepy thriller, Us is crafted like a horror film. And more of an older style horror film at that. There's blood and gore and jump scares and all the things we've come to expect in a modern horror movie, but there's also a buildup of tension and a group of characters that we're made to actually care about. The story starts small, initially just focusing on Adelaide and the long-lasting effects of a childhood trauma she experienced. The horror begins as something psychological and personal. But then the doppelganger family arrives, and the fear is more tangible. It affects the whole Wilson family now, and we're thrown into a very tense and unsettling home invasion story. As the film continues, the focal horror subgenre evolves, and the scope of the movie changes as well. By the time we reach the end, we're experiencing something far more expansive than we started with. But that build-up and expansion feels organic, and never feels like it was crafted exclusively for that second lens of social commentary. I absolutely loved the story crafting that went into this film. I was really interested in the broad story beats, but this film also sets up the small stuff amazingly well. Even after just one viewing, it's clear that nothing was mentioned or shown for no reason. Everything that the camera lingers on, or that the characters say, has a purpose, and most of these things are actually instances of foreshadowing that pay off later on, even if it's just a minor plot point or a comedic moment. I love movies where you can spot those things on rewatch, or the first time around if you're paying close enough attention. Beyond the story elements, the success of the movie required a number of other things too. The cinematography throughout this film is fantastic. There's some great shot composition with meticulous framing and use of mirrors, both literal, like in the funhouse, and figurative in the form of the doppelgangers. The opening scene was a joy to watch with a technical eye, and I especially loved the change in lighting, from the bright boardwalk to the dark and foreboding beach. The visuals were stunning throughout, but I can't forget to mention the score. With its ominous strings and xylophones, it was fantastically unsettling to perfectly match the tone of the film. Us is a movie that can be enjoyed simply on its most superficial level, but that second lens I mentioned offers some more depth to the story. There are individual metaphors strewn throughout this film that offer insight into specific moments or concepts. Everything from the rabbits to the scissors to 1111 has meaning that isn't particularly difficult to figure out in the context of the film. But whereas the overarching social commentary theme of a film like Get Out was pretty obvious and straightforward, Us manages to stay a little bit ambiguous and open to interpretation. After this first viewing, I have two different possible readings on the overarching theme of this movie. I can't get too in-depth for my explanations for these in a spoiler-free review, but suffice it to say I have some reasoning and specific evidence to back up my thoughts in a spoiler setting at some point. So the first of these two possibilities was actually one that jumped out at me fairly early on in the film. For this possibility, the general theme has to do with self-suppression, with pushing down negative feelings and anxieties and bottling all those things up due to societal pressures to appear normal or put together. The second theme theory that I've got was something that I noticed hints of during the second and third acts, but it actually took a little bit of research for me to recognize fully. Specifically, research into a historical event that is prominently referenced in this movie that I had never heard of before. So with that historical context, I think the theme has to do with class differences and those who go unnoticed or forgotten due to their socioeconomic status. Individually, the two lenses of this film are both interesting and satisfying as standalones. But when the story and horror film structure is combined with the metaphors and social commentary, Us takes on another quality altogether. It leaves us unsettled, perplexed, and thought-provoked all at the same time. The expansiveness of the third act becomes more than just an exciting story culmination. Instead, the overlapping lenses get flipped around, and we're forced to see ourselves in the context of the movie. It is a film about us, after all. Alright, so let's talk about the pros and cons. The first pro is definitely the story. Doppelgangers, lookalikes, clones, twins, and other similarly paired characters are nothing new to the horror genre. But Us manages to take the somewhat frequently tread territory and infuse it with an immense amount of creativity. The overarching story was incredibly interesting to me, and I loved where this film went and the path it took to get there. I also loved the meticulous crafting that went into setting up all the bits of foreshadowing that paid off later in the film. Pro number two was the duality of the film. Duality was written right into the fabric of this movie. There's the obvious duality inherent to the doppelganger plot, but I also appreciated it as it related to the lenses through which we can view the film, one literal and one metaphorical. Pro number three has got to be the performances. Our four leads all give fantastic performances, both as their normal selves as well as the doppelgangers. Child actors tend to be pretty hit or miss in horror films. Okay, usually miss, but Wright Joseph and Alex both do great jobs in their roles here. Duke also excels as the character of Gabe Wilson, injecting just enough levity into the film to keep it from ever getting too downbeat. But it's Lupita Nyong'o who really shines in the dual role of Adelaide in Red. Her passion and ferocity adds layers of depth to two characters who drive the film from opposite sides of the same coin. On the con side, I think my main issue with this movie is the sheer number of questions it raises. I understand that sometimes filmmakers opt to keep aspects of a film ambiguous and up to the interpretation of the viewer. As somebody who likes to know exactly what's going on in a movie, that can be frustrating, but I respect the decision. With Us, however, big elements of the film's story and mystery are actually revealed, which is great for somebody like me. Despite these explanations, I found that the revelations actually created more questions than they answered, both in terms of the plot and the theme. The questions aren't necessarily a bad thing, since they are thought-provoking and lead to some imagination-fueled speculation and conversation. But the reason I put this in the cons is because I found that a few of the questions led me down paths towards possible plot holes in the story. I can't get into any specifics without spoilers, but a few of the things that happen in this movie no longer made much sense after the revelations. Let me know if you'd be interested in a spoiler review and a more thorough breakdown of my thoughts on this movie, because I have a lot to say about it that I really can't say in a spoiler-free setting. I'm gonna give Us 4 out of 5 paws. I really enjoyed this movie, and it's one that I'm excited to watch a second time. Us is a movie that begs for repeat viewings, and I'm really curious to see how those rewatches will stack up to the first watch, and if they'll cause me to change my rating at all. I would recommend Us to people who like thought-provoking horror, or horror with underlying social commentary. If you're looking for a mindless slasher film, this probably isn't the right pick for you, but if you want a creepy and unsettling movie that makes you think and sparks conversation, check out Us. If you liked Us, I would definitely recommend Jordan Peele's first film, Get Out. From a plot perspective, it's a very different movie, but it's another horror thriller with something to say that goes beyond the superficial plot. For another somewhat psychological horror tale that's open to several interpretations, check out Kubrick's adaptation of Stephen King's The Shining. If you've had enough horror for one day, I'd recommend The Goonies for a slightly more lighthearted story, but one that still served as a clear inspiration for Us and was actually referenced several times in the movie. Alright, a few questions for you guys. Question 1. Have you seen Us? If so, what'd you think of it? And question 2. What is your favorite film where a second viewing allows you to see the movie in an entirely different context? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insider information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe while you're at it so you can see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.